I've accumulated a lot of calipers over the years, and in this video I want to explain to you the different types and how you use them. If you're interested in this, continue to watch. Hi, I'm Mike Peace. I'm passionate about wood turning, and I want to share tips, tricks, and techniques with you to help you become a better wood turner. If this is the kind of video you're interested in, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any future videos. I want to give a shout out to Glenn Crandall, who suggested this video after I did the one on dividers, and he said, well, how about one on calipers? So here it is. Let's start with these spring thickness calipers. I've got 3 sets. I've got an inexpensive Harbor Freight set. These are, to a wood turner, these are a little bit like clamps to a flat worker. You can't have too many if you're doing a lot of spindle work. This is a nicer set from Gouges. Made in India. It's got a much stronger spring and it's larger, and the everything's chrome painted, plated, a little less likely to rust. One thing keep in mind on both these, and let me explain what this is because I know y'all are wondering. This is a little jig I made that I can quickly set the diameter, the distance between these 1 3/4, 1 1/2, 1 1/4. I just put it up here and dial it in. A safety factor on all these, they come with a fairly sharp point, and you've got to grind these over and around them in use, and I'll show you that in a little more detail, and that's for all of them. These come rounded. These are a little bit deeper, and you can set 2 different dimensions on it. So let's show them in use. The reason you want to have lots of sets of these if you do a lot of spindle turning is because you're going to use several of them and have them preset to certain distances on your spindle, so you can dedicate that, especially when you like turning 4 table legs. You don't want to be constantly adjusting them because it's too easy to make a mistake. So let's just assume we've got this set. Our ideal diameter is just a bit smaller than this. Typically, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You want to lock your fingers around it like this. You can push it on, but frankly, you're safer if you pull it off. So let me show you how that works. So let's say right here, this is where we want to go down to a certain level. We slide this over, tilt it over, and then we're just going to let it ride in that where that parting tool is until it pulls off. So you can see how important it is to have these points rounded off. Now, a lot of people will do it this way. It's just not quite as safe pushing it on. But it winds up pushing it into the tool. Now, keep in mind these are springy, so they will slip when they get close. Now, for bowl turning, these can also be used as long as it's not too deep a bowl. This is a rough turn bowl, but you can see the approach. So I've got one tooth rubbing on the inside. Another reason for rounding it off, you wouldn't want to scratch the surface. And then you keep this 90 degrees to the surface of the wood, and you're actually measuring the gap. So let's say this is, I'm going to come over here to the ruler. This happens to be 3/4 of an inch. I can see what the distance is between here and here. I can see it's about 1/4 of an inch, and as I move it down, you can see how it changes as it goes in or out based on the thickness. In this case, fairly uniform. Again, keep it 90 degrees to the surface so you'll get an accurate measurement. And this will give you a real good idea whether it's getting thicker or thinner. Now, this same technique will work on a small hollow form or a large box like this, where you keep it. Now, in this case, it's a lot thinner, so let's adjust it to something smaller, where it'll just won't quite clear that lip, so I've got to go a little bit larger. Okay, so I can see that that's probably, let me measure it over here against my ruler, between half inch and 5/8. So I bring it around and I can see that gap, and as I move it around I can see whether it's uniform, and I can tell this is no more than less than a quarter of an inch thick based on that gap as I move it around, keeping it 90 degrees to the surface. Now let's look at another style. These are bowl gouges or hollow form gouges. This is a double-sided figure 8. So the trick is you bring it, you have these two ends touching, and the other end mimic the end that's measuring, and you can actually measure the gap here. In this case, it's right at, let me get it tight here. It's just about 5/8 right here. So you can actually use this to measure. There are a few other models where this will actually have a readout or a scale on it. So instead of a gap, you're reading the scale. So those are all different styles. And they have different shapes depending on whether you're doing mostly hollow forms. You need them longer or larger if you're doing hollow forms. Now you can make a set. Let me show you some that I made quite a while back. Okay, here's a set I made out of some wire and some cable. I don't know what you call it, cable clamps. You have flexible cable and you clamp this down. It'll hold two cables. And here's a stop that you get with that same kit that I think I glued that on with a little bit of contact cement. Let's see if you can see the end. You can't quite see the end, so let's measure the other end of the bowl. So when those ends touch like this, you'll actually, this is the gap, the distance between the tape and right there. And these work, again, keeping it at 90 degrees to the surface. And with this particular shape, you can handle different types of shapes of forms. Not only could you do bowls, you could also get inside hollow forms. And then let me show you a couple. You know, you can design and cut some out of thin plexiglass, aluminum, sheet metal, hardboard, or plywood, like these ones that Bill Lynch has made for some of his large hollow forms.
A solution.
Yeah, so here's a couple of homemade calipers for some of these large turnings that Bill makes. One of them kind of for a vase, and the other one more traditional figure 8 bowl shape. But okay, here's the third type of caliper. There's digital calipers, which has got a battery. You have to turn it on and off. Frankly, I like these the best. Here's calipers that do the same kind of measurement, but it's got a dial indicator. This works. This one's only in inches. This one is in metric and imperial inches and metric. So one of the features I like about this, you switch back and forth. This one I find a little harder when I'm doing certain types of measurements, and I'll show you that in a moment. Here's an inexpensive set from Harbor Freight, these Vernier Calipers. With all of them have the same kinds of features. They've got a locking knob. You can measure directly the how wide something is, the diameter, but you can also use them to measure the inside. For example, in this ferrule, and get the reading. Vernier calipers, if you want a very precise number, you got to go back to what you learned in middle school or high school about find the line that's closest to the one past the number to get that significant digit past the whole number. This is very similar, just inexpensive brass set you can put in your pocket. It only has the feature of measuring inside and outside. These also have the feature of measuring the depth, which is very handy. That is, these three. When you're measuring, for example, the inside of a box or a box lid, you want to see how deep it is. And then it'll give you a readout. And all of these will do the same thing. They also have locking knobs, so if you're doing repeated measurement back to a certain size, you can lock it so it doesn't slide on you. If you use these on the lathe when it's moving, which I don't advise, you've got to round these corners off, and then of course you lose some of the flexibility of them. One of the reasons I like the digital one is that if I'm doing some threading and I measure the inside recess, for example, I can then zero it out, and then if I have to add a millimeter, I can just slide this out till I get 1 millimeter, and lock it. Then I can use that to set the tenon, for example, for threading. And I don't have to do any math. I don't have to read the first number, write it down, add the number that I need to add to it, the extra amount of room. So that's why I like these. Frankly, the batteries are not a concern. They're extremely inexpensive. They last a long time. You get them off Amazon, you can get a dozen of them for a couple of bucks. So battery life or battery use is just not significant. I always keep a spare in the box. Here's another set of calipers that work very similar to the spring calipers in that you measure the distance, you touch the inside and measure the gap. These are just made out of spring wire. These are for small hollow forms or for small globe ornaments that are hollow. You can easily just measure the gap inside using something like this that you make. I don't advocate using coat hangers because they don't spring back as much. If you're not careful, you can stretch them and get a bad reading. Another one that I use occasionally when I'm making these one-piece coffee scoops, and I've got this mounted in a donut chuck. Think of this surface being over top here. You can't get in there to easily measure the walls, and I use this little spring caliper that I've got calibrated, that I just slip it in here like this and just feel the tension. And like I say, this is an example of why you need spring wires. And if it's not too tight, not too loose, I know the walls on the inside has been hollowed out enough. So those are all different forms of calipers, some of which you can make yourself. So this is going to give you an overview of the different kinds of calipers that are out there. You don't have to get them all at once, and as I've shown, sometimes you can get by with a DIY version at little or no cost until you decide what you're going to need, and then you can upgrade if you want to. This has been good for you. You enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Y'all stay safe and come on back here.